what if the great catastrophes of the 20th century simply didn't happen? It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it? Imagine a world where the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo in 1914 was just a tragic footnote, not the spark that set the world ablaze. Picture a timeline where the terms First World War and Second World War never entered our vocabulary. The sheer scale of the loss, the redrawing of maps, the toppling of empires, all of it gone. This isn't just a simple historical what if, it's a question that unravels the very fabric of the modern world as we know it today, on this day in August 2025. It asks us to look at our society, our technology, and our beliefs, and consider how many of them were forged in the crucible of conflict. Thinking about this alternate reality is a bit like peering into a strange, distorted mirror. In it, we see a world that is perhaps gentler, but also one that might be more stagnant. The immense human cost of these wars is almost impossible to comprehend. Tens of millions of lives were cut short. Entire generations of young men were wiped out on the battlefields of the Somme and Stalingrad. To erase these wars is to save those lives, to spare millions of families from unimaginable grief. This is the undeniable, wonderful positive of our hypothetical world. The lost generation would not be lost. They would have lived, loved, worked, and built a future we can only dream of. But history is never that simple, is it? It's a messy, complicated business. Removing the wars doesn't just remove the bad things, it also removes the powerful forces for change that they unleashed, for better or for worse. The wars acted as a violent, brutal accelerator for history. They shattered old certainties and forced new ideas to the forefront. Without them, the world of 1914, with its grand empires, its rigid social hierarchies, and its deeply entrenched traditions, might have simply carried on, evolving at a much, much slower pace. Would we have traded the horrors of war for a century of slow, conservative continuity? It's a question with no easy answer. So let's put on our historian's hat and step through the looking glass. We are going on a journey into a past that never was. We will explore the ghosts of empires that might have survived and ideologies that might never have been born. We will consider the lives of ordinary people, especially women, whose worlds were turned upside down by conflict. We will weigh the peace of this alternate world against the progress it might have missed out on. It's a grand thought experiment, a chance to understand our own world by imagining its complete opposite. Let's begin. Let's start with the most obvious and wonderful outcome, the saving of lives. The sheer number is staggering. Around 20 million people died in the First World War, and a horrifying 70 to 85 million in the Second. If these wars never happened, that is nearly 100 million people who would have lived. Think of the artists, scientists, leaders, and parents who never got to be. This alternate 20th century would be populated by their children and their grandchildren. The profound scar of loss that defined the century for so many nations, from Britain and France to Russia and Germany, would be absent. The silence on Armistice Day would be just silence. The world would be a fuller, less wounded place. Without the wars, the political map of Europe would look remarkably stable, almost frozen in time. The great powers of 1914, Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, would likely have continued to dominate the continent. Borders that were violently redrawn by treaties like Versailles would have remained. Countries like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia would never have been created. Poland might have remained partitioned between its powerful neighbors. This stability would have prevented the decades of ethnic strife and border disputes that plagued Central and Eastern Europe after 1918. It would have been a peace of a sort maintained by the old order. This world would also have seen the continuation of European global dominance. The wars were a form of imperial suicide. They bankrupted the great powers, shattered their prestige, and fueled independence movements across their colonies in Africa and Asia. In a world without these wars, the British Empire might have slowly evolved into a commonwealth, but its grip on power would have remained far stronger for much longer. The French, Belgian, Dutch, and Portuguese empires would also have faced fewer challenges to their authority. The process of decolonization, which defined the mid-20th century, might have been delayed by decades or taken a completely different, perhaps more negotiated path. Finally, this timeline would be one of immense cultural and economic continuity. The pre-1914 era, often called the Belle Époque or Gilded Age, was a time of great confidence, artistic innovation, and growing global trade. Without the wars to shatter this world, that spirit might have carried on. the economic devastation, the hyperinflation in Germany, the Great Depression, many of these calamities were directly linked to the First World War and its aftermath. A peaceful 20th century could have been one of steady, if perhaps unequal, economic growth. The great cities of Europe would be spared from bombing, their cultural treasures intact, preserving a heritage that we tragically lost. One of the most dramatic consequences of the First World War was the death of empires. In the space of just a few years, 4 ancient and powerful dynasties were swept away. The Romanovs in Russia, the Hohenzollerns in Germany, the Habsburgs in Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans in Turkey all lost their thrones. But what if the war never came? It's highly likely these imperial houses would have survived, at least for a while longer. The pressures that led to their downfall, military defeat, economic collapse, and national starvation, would not have existed in the same way. The crowns and thrones that had defined Europe for centuries would have remained firmly in place. Let's look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that sprawling, multi-ethnic state in the heart of Europe. It was often called the sick man of Europe, teetering on the brink of collapse from its internal nationalist tensions. However, many historians believe it was the war itself that delivered the fatal blow. Without the strain of total war, the empire might have muddled through, perhaps reforming into a federal state, a United States of Greater Austria, as some thinkers proposed. Emperor Franz Josef's successor, Karl I, was a reformer. He might have granted more autonomy to the Slavs, Hungarians, and other groups, preserving his diverse realm through compromise rather than conflict. Across the border in Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II would have remained on his throne. The German Empire was a young, dynamic, and powerful nation. It was a world leader in science, industry, and education. Without the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles and the crippling war reparations, Germany would have likely continued its trajectory as Europe's dominant economic power. The monarchy itself might have evolved, becoming more constitutional and less autocratic, similar to the British model. The social democratic movements that were growing in strength would have pushed for reform, but likely through parliament, not through revolution on the streets of a defeated Berlin. And what of the vast Russian and Ottoman empires? Tsar Nicholas II faced enormous internal problems, as the 1905 revolution showed. But without the catastrophe of the First World War, which pushed the Russian people to the breaking point, a Bolshevik revolution in 1917 seems far less likely. The Tsar might have been forced to concede more power to the Duma, his parliament, slowly transforming Russia into a constitutional monarchy. Similarly, the Ottoman Empire was undertaking reforms with the Young Turk movement. Without the disaster of siding with Germany in the war, it might have managed to hold on to its core territories, including much of the Middle East, preventing the chaotic carve-up by Britain and France that has caused instability ever since.